Good evening, friends, and shalom, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you that we are living in biblical times, and that statement is definitely never been truer, it seems like, on this particular show, as you guys may be able to see by the headline, but obviously we will get into all of that fun, juicy, not so pleasant kind of stuff. Want to just say before we get into that, if you guys are here, want to remind you this is exclusively on the Synagogue News. We remind you to think like a Neanderthal and own those little insults that people want to throw at you. If you're new to this channel, please consider liking and sharing this video, hitting that bell to get notified every time that we go live. We try to go live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And, of course, get this out to all the different social media platforms which you frequent. What good is a message without an audience to hear it? While you're out there frequenting different social media platforms, I would like to recommend to everybody that you get on the different alternative social media platforms. Things such as Parler, Gab, and Minds if you're into Twitter. Things like Rumble, where you can actually find this channel if you're into YouTube. And I definitely recommend you follow this channel on Rumble because I do think this channel will be taken down at some point. If you're into Facebook, they have MeWe and Telegram, which are kind of like Facebook clones. But the really cool thing about all these different social media platforms is that they respect your freedom of speech. They have a vested interest in protecting it. They want their platforms to be considered neutral. And that, as a result, means that we are able to talk more freely about matters of the news and politics and religion and philosophy. And, of course, even what your opinion is on certain movies and shows and things like that, because we all know that YouTube has gone after some people even for stuff like that. So if you do support freedom of speech, please do consider getting an account on one of these different alternative social media platforms, whichever one happens to clone the site you already use. If you don't consider yourself politically right-wing, that's perfectly fine, because your being there makes these websites less of an echo chamber, right? The more people we have who are center right and center left and center total moderate right and left wing progressive and all this other kind of stuff, the more of those guys you get on these platforms, the less and less of an echo chamber these platforms actually become, right? Because you got to remember, when it comes to, like, for example, Gab is interested in defending your freedom of speech and your right to say what you wish to say, so long as you are not actually committing any crimes, right? This means that if that happens to be raging flamboyant communism and LGBTQ right stuff, then that flies. That's perfectly cool on Gab, right? So come on to Gab, come on to Parler, come on to Rumble, have these conversations with us, and let's take back internet free speech from these Silicon Valley overlords, shall we? I think we shall. Want to go ahead and jump right into our first article for today. Excuse me, not article, our first discussion for today, our little pre-article discussion kind of thing. I need to find a catchy little pithy name for that stuff. But at any rate, and what it is, is, since I've essentially become almost the most consistent news source on the Pastor Tony Spell situation, I figured I would use this time to give you guys some updates on that very situation. The 76-page intervention, which Tony Spell actually had, which John Bell Edwards actually had filed against Pastor Tony Spell, was retracted, mainly because the current governor of Louisiana, the aforementioned John Bell Edwards, actually got called out for forging the signature of Jeff Landry, the Attorney General of Louisiana, as well as certain other attorneys under his jurisdiction, forging their signature on the intervention to give the impression, number one, of legality, and number two, of support from both the judicial elements of the executive branch and the head of the executive branch himself, right? Well, having been called out on this, Governor Edwards did actually pull back, and he has now issued a pithier but still 26-page long intervention a second time to try and basically argue that he is legally liable or legally able to sue Pastor Tony Spell directly, even though that's something, of course, that only an attorney general could do coming from the executive branch of the state government. Now, obviously, what's going to happen with this, we're not really sure. We'll certainly see. Pastor Spell is on top of dealing with this, also trying to appeal a recent dismissal of his lawsuit against Governor Edwards for violation of his constitutional rights. He said that it was violation of his First Amendment rights, namely the right to peaceably assemble and the right to practice your religion freely. I happen to agree with him completely. And he is also dealing with the very case that Governor Edwards is trying to intervene in, which is a case that is essentially the state of Louisiana against Pastor Spell, with the state of Louisiana charging him with six separate counts of, I think, public endangerment is how they're actually charging it. But basically, it's defying the government mandates from 2020. He was keeping his church services open. He was not having any sort of a capacity as far as, or a limit to his capacity, as far as, not letting certain people in and stuff like that. Wasn't having them do social distancing or anything like that. Wasn't, like I said, shutting down or making them mask. And so he ended up getting charged with 6 different counts, each bearing a maximum of 6 months in jail and a $500 fine, meaning his total maximum would be 3 years in jail and a $3,000 fine. And at least for most states, once you go longer than 1 year in jail, they actually won't send you to jail but prison. So in reality, this would be 3 years in prison and a $3,000 fine at the maximum, right? So we got all these different things going on: the intervention, the actual court case, the lawsuit against Governor Edwards because of the court case, the original 76-page intervention that came out, I think, last Tuesday. And, of course, the accusations of forgery, which have at this point essentially been confirmed. But nonetheless, just wanted to give you guys this update to let you know that Edwards has filed this new lawsuit. I'm going to quickly quote from, I believe this is actually Lighthouse Tabernacle Church website, which is the church which Pastor Tony Spell actually pastors at. And this is just a very quick update that they had actually posted here about 3 days ago. It says Edwards files new lawsuit as he attempts to usurp all authority and act as judge, jury, and lawyer. After Attorney General Jeff Landry struck back against Governor of Louisiana John Bel Edwards' deceptive filing against Pastor Tony Spell, the governor files yet another 26-page lawsuit against Pastor Spell. Louisiana politics are dirty and ugly, saints. The governor continues to release his propaganda about the pandemic despite so much evidence to the contrary. Furthermore, and most importantly, he continues to try and destroy the works of the Almighty Church and infringe upon the rights of citizens to freely assemble. To freely assembly is actually what it says here, but freely assemble is what they mean, and worship Almighty God as God commanded. Governor Edwards believes he decides when people can gather. We bond together in unity, prayer, and fasting against the demonic strongholds against the church. Contend for the faith. And it also has a link saying you are welcome to read the newest filing from the governor here. I am going to go ahead and drop a link in the live chat for you guys. Obviously, we cannot read the entire 26-page intervention because that would take up not only this entire show, but probably the next week's shows. But nonetheless, if you guys would like to read it for yourself, there is the entire 26-page intervention written by John Bel Edwards, or not written by John Bel Edwards, but filed by the office of John Bel Edwards. It's essentially a lawsuit against Pastor Tony Spell and an attempt to get legal right to personally prosecute Pastor Tony Spell. But nonetheless, there is linked to the PDF for you. And the quote we just read was, again, from Lighthouse Tabernacle Church website, just kind of giving updates from the pastor himself as far as how he perceives this in his official statement and all this other kind of stuff. But there's a couple really important things about this before we move on. Number one, the fact that he retracted his original 76-page lawsuit and then actually gave this 26-page lawsuit means, number one, that he is acknowledging that his first one was fraudulent, and number two, that he is removing a lot of information which he thought wasn't going to fly, hence the 50-page difference between the first one and the second one, right? So this is essentially a concession on the part of John Bel Edwards that his original lawsuit, which came out last Tuesday, was indeed a matter of, or was indeed an example, of spiteful corruption against a pastor who indeed has done, at least in my opinion, absolutely nothing wrong. Excuse me. The other thing that I think is important to notice about this is that for all of the chutzpah behind Governor Edwards, he knows, it seems, that he is standing on a glass throne, so to speak, right? He seems to be aware, especially when the Attorney General himself starts to come out and say, hey, you're forging my signature. This is technically perjury. You're not legally allowed to do this, and you're trying to do it to give your actions an air of legitimacy, which ironically, they're doing the exact opposite, right? And when this kind of thing happens, and when Pastor Spell goes to the media, and all these other different kinds of things, what it shows me, the reactions on the part of Governor Edwards, retracting and trying to make his statement a little bit more politically tight, a little bit more politically astute, a little bit more politically correct, right? It shows me that he is aware of the fact that he's skating on some thin ice, and the ice could potentially be cracking. He might hear those, really creepy sounds that you hear in your, favorite winter movie when they go on the ice skating ring, right? It's typically a frozen pond or something like that. You guys have all seen the scene. It's in like 100 different movies. It seems like he's kind of hearing those little cracks we're all familiar with from those movies, right? And I think that means we should definitely keep the pressure up on the governor. He is and by we, of course, I just mean people all across the United States. We do need to understand that this is not, at least, in my opinion, but you're listening to the show, right? So I guess you care my opinion, at least to a small extent. But I don't think this is an issue that we should be willing to compromise in. Not to the same, actually, yeah, to the same level as the abortion thing. It's different because with the, obviously with the abortion thing, it's talking about, with me voicing my opinion about something that I think is wrong. But this is different. This is more of something that I think is your fundamental right. And so, there's a difference to what you guys have heard me say on that issue, in the sense that that's more of a stand, I guess you're taking. That's more of a, I don't know what the word is here, an attack, a polemic, right? This is more of an apologetic, a defense. I think this is a fundamental right that all human beings have, regardless of faith. I don't believe you should be shutting down your mosques, or the government, should be shutting down your mosques. I don't believe that they should be shutting down your synagogues. I don't believe that they should be shutting down your monasteries. I don't believe that they should be shutting down your temples if you're a Mormon. I believe very strongly that you have an inalienable, absolute right to assemble with believers of like precious faith, whatever your faith happens to be. I did just quote a Bible verse, but that's because that is my faith, right? You have that right in this country to do that, to worship according to your conscience, to follow the God who you see fit to follow, or gods, or lack thereof, who you see fit to follow. Now, as an apologist, as a believer, I'm going to obviously try to persuade you against that. I'm going to try and let you know about the gospel truth and the message of sin and salvation from sin and all that other kind of stuff. But the only reason I'm even allowed to have that conversation with you in the first place is because we've already agreed on this other thing I'm talking about, which is it is a fundamental, inalienable, absolute right that we are allowed to freely worship, to practice our religion as our conscience dictates, right? And I believe personally, this shouldn't be a left or right issue. This should be a liberty issue where we are all united in saying, sorry, government, you don't get to step any farther. But with that being said, I burned about 15 minutes already. So let's go ahead and jump into the articles for today. The first thing we're going to talk about, because it is that big a deal, is the headliner. And that is the Ukrainian issue is getting kind of crazy, if we're being honest. I titled this segment "Some Damned Foolish Thing." For those of you who know history, or at least this particular era of history, this is a quote from the great German Chancellor and Ambassador Otto von Bismarck. Von Bismarck is widely considered to be the German forefather, or founding father, if you will. He's considered to be more responsible than any other politician for the unification of the German states into one solid nation, which was Germany, or the German Empire at the time, in the 19th century. And he's also considered to be an icon for European conservatism, though that's not something we're going to be getting into today. He has a famous quote from 1888 where he says, "The great European war will surely come from some damned foolish thing in the Balkans," right? And the Balkans region is that region of Albania, Macedonia, Greece, Bosnia, Herzegovina, all that other kind of stuff in Europe. If you're familiar with geography, that's like right next to the Middle East, but still in Europe, hanging out on the Mediterranean, right? He astutely saw that that region was incredibly hectic, that it was a powder keg just waiting to explode, that it indeed would explode, and that the different entanglements and alliances that existed around those nations in that area would cause all of Europe to go into war, right? And he got it right on the money. What ends up causing the Great European War, or what we today call World War I, is indeed some damned foolish thing in the Balkans, when a Serbian assassin from a group called the Black Death, only a 19-year-old kid, can you imagine? 19-year-old kid is the catalyst for World War I. And on a fluke, after failing to assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he manages to successfully assassinate the Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, which causes Austria-Hungary to invade Serbia, which causes Russia to invade Austria-Hungary, which causes Germany to declare war on both France and Germany, which causes Germany to go through Belgium and declare war on Belgium, which causes the UK to declare war on Germany. And you see where this history ends up getting us, right? A terrible situation. Absolutely awful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, fast forward to 2022, and we are again witnessing some damned foolish thing, where this time it's not in the Balkans. This time it's in the Eastern Bloc, or as we used to call it, the Eastern Bloc, right? But once again, we are witnessing a bunch of egotistical, egomaniacal, megamaniacal, and quite frankly, stupid politicians on every side get real comfortable with the idea of throwing wave upon wave of men at each other for literally nothing. For literally nothing. If you want to see another very stupid war, stay tuned, friends, because it does seem like we are actually on our way to that. And so that is why I've titled this particular segment Some Damn Foolish Thing. Let's go ahead and get into our article for today. Let me go ahead and pull it up here. And the article is, Pentagon has put 8,500 troops in the Ukraine on heightened alert, meaning be prepared for something to pop off, as the U.S. weighs its military actions against Russia. Let me read that title again. Pentagon puts 8,500 troops on heightened alert as U.S. weighs military action against Russia. Now, I don't know if I have to remind you guys, but obviously some of you guys are going to be new here, and maybe some of you guys didn't see the episodes where I've talked about this, and maybe you just forgot. But just in case, let me remind you guys that if the United States and Russia go to war with each other, well, the United States and Russia have friends who are treaty bound to go to war with the people that those particular nations themselves have gone to war with. So, for example, Russia's quite chummy with China, which happens to have a problem with Taiwan, by the way, which happens to be defended by the United States, by the way. So you can kind of see why that could be a catalyst for them to want to do something. Russia happens to be friends with Iran, who also happens to be friends with China, who also happens to be enemies with Israel, who also happens to be friends with the United States. Also, let's bring into the fact that NATO is in this, is involved with being friendly with the United States, including the nation of Turkey, which, though being a member of NATO, is actually friendly with the Russia-Iran-China axis group that we currently have right now. And by the way, happens to be not particularly fond of certain folk who are associated with NATO, such as the European Union, which is essentially NATO sans Turkey, and I guess sans Great Britain as well. And also happens to not be particularly fond of Saudi Arabia and Israel, who are also friends with this Western group that I've talked about. So the point here being that war between Russia and the United States over Ukraine becomes war between Israel and Iran over Jerusalem, becomes war between China and the United States over Taiwan, becomes war between the European nations and Russia over the Eastern Bloc, becomes. Do you get the idea? I will like to remind you guys, there are countries who are associated with this, quote, new axis, as I call them, on our side of the world. Brazil, super chummy with China. Cuba, super chummy with China. Canada is not super chummy with China, but certainly more chummy than I would like them to be, right? So, these alliances, we're talking about a solid third of the country, or a solid third of the world, that is allied with each other against the other third of the world, with another third seemingly caught in the balance. So just remember, when we're talking about heightened tensions in Armenia, Azerbaijan, heightened tensions between China, Taiwan, heightened tensions between Palestine and Iran and Turkey versus Israel, Saudi Arabia, and that bloc, or as we actually see manifesting in front of us, heightened tensions in the Ukraine, just remember why this is not just a regional issue. That this is not just a regional issue. Remember that this is some damned foolish thing that's going to drag the entire world into war over what? Over what? But at any rate, let's go in. Among the options presented to the president was to move troops and equipment from other parts of Europe into Poland, Romania, and countries neighboring Ukraine. This is originally from NBC News, written by Courtney Cube and Kelly O'Donnell, as you may be able to see on your screen. The United States is discussing the deployment of American military forces to Eastern Europe with its NATO allies, a senior administration official said Monday, as President Joe Biden weighs options for responding to Russian threats against Ukraine. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin has placed 8,500 troops on heightened alert to assist with the defense of NATO allies, Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said during a news briefing Monday. He said no deployment orders have been given, and this was originally written yesterday, as of this time, which is 9:40 p.m. Mountain Time on January the 24th, 2022. As of this time, this remains current and accurate, so far as I know, at least. Quote, I want to reinforce that as of now, the decision has been made to put these units on higher alert and higher alert only, said Kirby. No decisions have been made to deploy forces from the United States at this time, end quote. With Moscow massing more than 100,000 troops at its neighbor's border and no diplomatic breakthrough in sight, the West is stepping up its response and, amid mounting fears an invasion could be imminent. Now, here's one of the things that makes this a little unfortunate, to say the least, and that is absolutely saying the very least. And that is that the information which tells us Ukraine is probably going to be invaded by Russia soon is good information. When I say some damned foolish thing, don't think I am simply criticizing the United States and the West. There's a lot of criticism to go around on both sides. I, of course, have been intensely critical of Obama, Trump, and Biden in that none of them have made any attempt whatsoever to try and make peace with Russia, even though we've not had a legitimate reason to fight with Russia since 1991, which is before I was even born. 7 years before I was born, in fact. Before my oldest brother was even born, in fact. And so, there's certainly a lot of blame to be thrown around here on the West, but there is a lot of blame to be thrown around on the side of these new Axis powers as well. Russia is absolutely threatening to invade Ukraine. They have 100,000 troops at the border. They have provocateurs inside Russia. They obviously have implied that they wanted to do this before, right? With the whole Crimea thing that happened in 2014. They have said to the United States and Europe, we demand the Ukraine not be considered part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, otherwise known as NATO. Why would you demand such a thing? Well, because if Ukraine is part of NATO, then the rest of NATO has to step in if Russia invades Ukraine, right? You see the problem here? So, we have no reason whatsoever, is sort of the point, to trust that Putin will do anything other than what Putin is obviously preparing to do, and that is invade the Ukraine, right? Now, why exactly does Putin want to invade the Ukraine? Well, there's a lot of reasons. If we're being honest, there is a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons is kind of to reestablish Russian glory. I think in the West, we've kind of forgotten that normally, and I don't necessarily say that this is a negative for the West, but it is abnormal if one looks at not only the history of humanity, but also what most nations think about today. Normally, people have this mentality of, I want glory for my homeland, my fatherland, my motherland, whatever you happen to call it. I want glory. I want prestige. I want to be the toughest kid on the block, the richest kid on the block, the kid who produces the best stuff. That's what I would like my country to be, right? And in most areas of the world, being the toughest kid on the block is a perfectly legitimate means of getting that prestige. And what better area to take than the Ukraine, which has been so culturally linked to Russia since well before there were communists in Russia, since even before there were czars in Russia. I mean, the Ukrainian language and the Russian language are almost mutually intelligible, right? These guys are cut from the same genetic cloth. They're cut from the same linguistic cloth. They're cut from the same religious cloth. Their histories are irreversibly linked with each other, irrevocably linked with each other, right? So what better area to take than this area which has been considered so linked to you to begin with, right? Now, I'm not justifying anything. I'm just letting you know this is one of the reasons I think that Putin would like to take the Ukraine, because it'll establish Russian prestige. We just walked into a country. We took it. We took their land. It's ours now. We've expanded our territory. Look at us and how tough we are. The Roman Empire thing all over again, because every country in the world wants to be a Roman Empire. Don't let them kid you, right? Excuse me. Got to get a drink of water. But nonetheless, that's one reason. I think another reason to invade Ukraine is I do think that Putin wants to demonstrate how unafraid of the West he is, how strong and courageous and brave and like a bear and willing to beat up on the Western countries that he is. Let's remind everybody that from the perspective of a Russian citizen, Putin is not just considered a dictator and a strongman. He's also considered a defender of the Russian way of life. He's also considered a warrior who is sticking up to the West when nobody else will do so, right? Now, whether or not that's true is somewhat irrelevant. That's how Russians perceive him. And that's how he wishes to be perceived by Russians. And indeed, that's probably how he wishes to be perceived by Americans. And walking up to Americans and giving them the metaphorical slap in the face with your removed glove, saying, hey, I'm going to take what I want, and you're not going to stop me because I am Big Daddy Vladimir on the block here, right? That obviously goes a mile and a half to demonstrating how powerful Russia is, to demonstrating what a defender of the Russian people he actually is, at least in the mind of himself and of the Russian people. Now, of course, that mentality is precisely what got people into, as well as some other stupid mentalities, is precisely what got people into World War I and II. And a lot of people, to put it bluntly, if you're not successful in that, you end up being considered, either completely incompetent or absolutely evil, right? Both of which are true. But nonetheless, that kind of glory is I think what Putin is searching for, the kind of glory which says, hey, I'm reestablishing prestige. I am the tough guy on the block. And all of you other Western powers who have such a problem with me, you better be backing up because I get to demand what I want. And yeah, I mean, that's all I can say about that. But let's go ahead and jump back into the article. NATO said Monday that it was sending ships and fighter jets, to Eastern Europe, and that Washington, quote, has also made clear that it is considering increasing its military presence in the eastern part of the alliance, end quote. Biden participated in a roughly 90-minute video conference with European leaders Monday afternoon to discuss Russia's military buildup on Ukraine's borders, the White House said. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, absolute joke that man is, Polish President Andrzej Duda, probably said that wrong, but nonetheless, French President Emmanuel Macron, also a joke, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi, and other leaders participated in the call. Following the video conference, Biden told reporters it was very, very, very good meeting. Good for him. Lots of varies. Adding that there was total unanimity with all the European leaders. The president said he would have more to say on the issue later. And of course, that just means his handlers probably haven't written his speech yet. But, insulting the pudding that occupies our White House aside. In a statement, the White House said Biden and European leaders, quote, reiterated their continued concern about the Russian military buildup on Ukraine's borders and expressed their support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, end quote. The White House said the leaders underscored their shared desire for a diplomatic resolution and also discussed their joint efforts to deter further Russian aggression against Ukraine. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, a Democrat from California, has asked the White House for a briefing for all House members on the situation, a source familiar with the matter said. A separate source said Senate Majority Leader Schumer, a Democrat from New York, has requested a classified briefing next week for all senators. Biden was briefed by Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Saturday about U.S. options for responding if Russia invades Ukraine, as well as options for U.S. military movements in advance of an invasion, according to a defense official and a senior administration official. Now, here's the thing. Wrong as Russia may be, I do not believe that the United States should be policing the world. So in my personal opinion, I don't think it's our place to be invading, to be sending United States soldiers into the Ukraine to fight Russians on behalf of the Ukraine. I just personally think that's not our job. Now, of course, the risk you run in taking that kind of non-interventionist approach is we're here now. What if Russia actually does invade the Ukraine? And it's not just that they could potentially take the Ukraine. And then, of course, the Ukrainian people are without a homeland. And you guys hopefully know how I feel about an ethnos without a homeland at this point. But on top of that, we know from history that this has the potential to embolden Vladimir Putin to do basically whatever it is that he wishes. A la Adolf Hitler in the 1930s. When he took Austria, and then they said, okay, well, you can't have anything else. So he took the Sudetenland, and then they said, okay, well, you can't have anything else. So he took Czechoslovakia, and then they said, well, you can't have anything else. And then he invaded Poland, and you get the idea. The point kind of being that if Putin is set, if he is determined to make this war happen, it will happen. And there's nothing we can do about it. In the hands of Vladimir Putin himself, personally and alone, is the issue of a third world war. He decides if we have it and if we don't. And I have a feeling he gets a kick out of that kind of power. I have a feeling he's a little bit, ecstatic at the idea that in his own clammy little hands, his corrupt former KGB fingers grasp the momentous issue of World War III, and no other hands outside the good Lord's grasp that issue. That's a pretty unique situation to be in. And it, I think, demonstrates how dangerous of a situation we're in right now. Right? We're essentially on Putin's time at this moment. We are on Vladimir Putin's time. Much like in the 30s, we were on Hitler's time. much like in the early 1900s, we were on the Serbians' time or the Austrians' time, depending on which side of it you want to look at. And again, as terrible as it is to say, we are witnessing some damned foolish thing right now. We are watching it right in front of our eyes. And the thing is there's a couple damned foolish things. There's some we're not going to get to talk about today because I have to spend so much time talking about this. But Taiwan is at a level 11 on a scale of 1 to 5, right? Things are bad, real bad. What about Israel, Iran? Yeah, no, things are bad. My friends, there was a Israeli attack against an Iranian nuclear facility yesterday. Did you know that? There were 39 Chinese warplanes flying in Taiwanese airspace today. This day. These are the things that we're not talking about. And even with that, why are we not talking about them? Because there's so much important stuff that we are talking about, such as the Ukraine thing. This is where we're at. I don't really have anything else to say besides that. It's hard for me. Like, I don't have but don't worry, it gets better kind of thing. Because to be honest with you, I'm not sure that it does. At best, it gets postponed. You'll often hear people say when they talk about, the alternate history, and they'll say, well, what if the war really did end by Christmas? What if we had a true Christmas truce? That's a beautiful story if anybody wants to read it, and it happened for real. But what if we had a true Christmas truce where the soldiers laid down arms and were unwilling to fight? And so many people often say, well, as beautiful and amazing as that would have been, you kicked the can down the road. You didn't actually solve the problem. And that's the best we got right now. The can could be kicked, but the stage is set for a absolutely epic chess game. And the word epic does not mean good. It just means grand in scope. Among the options presented for the U.S. military in advance of an invasion were bomber flights over the region, ship visits into the Black Sea, and the moving of troops and some equipment from other parts of Europe into Poland, Romania, and other countries neighboring the Ukraine. Austin presented options to reassure NATO allies and reinforce their defenses, specifically the defenses of those countries bordering Ukraine, the officials said. The goal is to show unity and strength within NATO and deter Russian aggression against allies in the region, the officials said. Biden was at the presidential retreat at Camp David, Maryland, and Austin briefed him via a secure video teleconference. Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Mark Milley was on the call. Generally, the secretary briefs the president, and then the chairman provides more operational specifics. Some details of the briefings were previously reported by the New York Times. Russia has repeatedly denied planning to invade and has blamed the West for stoking tensions. And of course, in a way, I almost hope that's true, because I don't think that the West will actually start a fight at this current point in time. So if this is all misinterpretation, then that would be nice, because it would mean that probably nothing's going to happen. But I just have so much doubt for that at this point in time. But regardless, quote, all this is happening not because of what we, Russia, are doing. This is happening because of what NATO and the U.S. are doing, end quote. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said during a conference call with reporters on Monday. As Biden weighed his options, the State Department ordered family members of embassy employees to leave Kiev, in Kiev to leave Sunday, and authorized non-emergency diplomatic employees in Ukraine to depart. It also warned Americans not to travel either to Ukraine or Russia, citing the possibility of Russian military action. This has actually been something that is impactful to people I know, because there are members of my church who I know quite well who were born and raised in Ukraine. This is their homeland, right? That is potentially going to be invaded. And so, this is a situation that, they know better than anybody, right? Other than, the people who are actually there, of course, but I mean, out of Americans, right? Know better than any other Americans. And I'm sure that that's not a fun thing for them to see. Ukraine criticized the move to withdraw diplomats' families as premature, while U.S. allies were split on whether to immediately follow America's lead, while the UK with the UK, doing so, but the European Union saying it would not for now. The briefing for Biden included the latest intelligence that the Russian military has not stopped building up forces around Ukraine, the official said. Another defense official said Putin continues to add more military units and flow forces to the border areas around Ukraine. Quote, he's getting stronger, literally by the day, end quote, the defense official said. The officials would not say whether Biden approved any movements. Senior administration official did say some troops and assets, could be repositioned in the coming days. Air Force General Todd Walters, the commander of U.S. European Command and Supreme Allied Commander Europe, has been preparing options for weeks. The defense official and the senior administration official, the defense official and senior administration official said. Walters has the authority to move some forces around his theater, but he is keeping Austin and military leaders informed, given the gravity of the situation, officials said. Meanwhile, NATO said early Monday that it was putting extra forces on standby and sending more ships and fighter jets to the region, including beefing up its deterrence presence in the Baltic Sea. Quote, NATO will continue to take all necessary measures to protect and defend all allies, including by reinforcing the eastern part of the alliance. We will always respond to any deterioration of our security environment, including through strengthening our collective defense, end quote, Stoltenberg said. And this gets exactly to what I am talking about when I'm saying this is an issue that will pull other nations in. It's not just going to be the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. It will be the United States and Russia and Ukraine and Europe and China and North Korea and Great Britain is part of Europe. My apologies. Cuba, Brazil, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Japan, so on, so forth. It's all going to continue. Canada, Mexico, right? This will pull the whole world up in. It's going to be hard for Switzerland to stay out of this one, I'm telling you. If, of course, it happens. We don't know that it would happen. But this is why it's such a dangerous thing if it did happen, because there's a lot of alliances everywhere. And that's how you get, small little pops turning into massive forest fires. Russian Navy vessels began drills in the Baltic Sea focused on naval and anti-aircraft defense on Monday. The Russian state news agency RIA Novosti reported, according to Reuters. Also Monday, the U.S. military and NATO exercise Neptune Strike 22, which includes training. That is today, by the way, the Monday they're talking about. Which includes training with NATO allies for capabilities that could be used against Russia. As part of the exercise, the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group will conduct long-range strike training and anti-submarine warfare, training from the Mediterranean. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said the exercise is designed to demonstrate NATO's ability to integrate the high-end maritime strike capabilities of an aircraft carrier strike group to support the deterrence and defense of the alliance. And that is the end of the article there. So, that's all we got for that one. I mean, I did a lot of commentary and there's not much more to say. These are scary times is all I got to say. These are scary times. Those of you who are praying people, I would suggest, you should be praying always. But if there was ever a time to be praying for the nation, more so than just praying that we would not be corrupt, or that we would, see increases to freedoms or whatever it is that we've prayed for before, prosperities and all this other kind of stuff. Just not dying would be something to ask for now. Keep it real simple. I'm sure all of us know members of the United States Army, or if you're in the country of Canada, the Canadian Army. I know I have at least one Canadian who consistently watches the show, but a couple more also, or any other country for that matter, whatever country you're in. I'm sure you know members of your Army or of your Navy or of your Air Force or your local National Guard. You know, those people are cannon fodder to the suits, right? You ever seen Star Wars, the battle droids that just kind of go in mass and wave upon wave and then get destroyed? Well, it's great when it's battle droids in a movie, but in real life, those are humans, and they're being killed by other humans who themselves are also being thrown wave upon wave at the enemy. And those are faces that you don't get to see anymore once it actually happens. Because unlike the actor who takes off the mask and goes and plays in a different movie with a different mask, these guys are actually going to real life war, to real life die, and real life kill. And it's not fun. So just be in consideration, or keep that in consideration, I guess I should say. And yeah, with that, we got a limited amount of time. I try to keep these at about an hour. It doesn't tend to work out that way, but I want to get to at least one of my other news articles. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and talk probably about Assange. That's the one I'm going to go ahead and choose. Let's talk about Julian Assange. Because it'll be short and it'll be some good news, I think, after some relatively negative news to start off the show, or to take up the bulk of the show, rather. But Assange has won the right to appeal to the UK's higher court his extradition to the United States. For those of you who do not know or need a little bit of a refresher, Julian Assange, the courts in the UK did rule that Julian Assange could be extradited to the United States and face spying charges here, as well as other charges. Really, what's kind of going on is all the different countries like Australia and Norway and Britain and so on, we're all basically kind of tossing Assange around so that we can each charge him with the respective stuff that we think he's guilty of. And then after we've made a public spectacle of this man, somebody's going to, of course, get to keep him in prison for the rest of his natural born life, unfortunately. Now, this doesn't get Assange out of any of the hot water he's in per se, other than that particular carousel I just described. But he did win the right to appeal that ruling, which said he could be extradited to the United States. So hopefully he will not actually be tossed around like a ragdoll to all these different countries, and will only have to defeat one group of or collection, of charges against him. But nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump into this. This is another article from NBC. WikiLeaks Assange can take extradition appeal to UK's top court. Again, WikiLeaks Assange can take extradition to appeal. Extradition appeal to the UK's top court. In December, the High Court in London overturned a lower court's ruling that Assange should not be extradited due to mental health concerns. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange on Monday was given the chance to challenge the decision allowing him to be extradited to the United States to face 18 criminal charges, including breaking a spying law, to Britain's Supreme Court. So he's going to take that case to Britain's Supreme Court, is what they're saying. U.S. authorities are seeking Australian-born Assange, 50, to face trial on 18 counts relating to WikiLeaks, release of vast troves of confidential U.S. military records and diplomatic cables, which they said put lives in danger. Now, just need to say briefly, for those who may not know, the complicated thing about the Assange case is that statement is true. He absolutely did break spying laws, and he absolutely did publish information which put particularly U.S. servicemen and women in harm's way. In fact, it was such a disaster the way he published the information that Edward Snowden when he was going to publish his own leaks, actually specifically avoided Julian Assange because he did not want something so sloppy done to the information that he was sharing. Now, the case in particular, which we're referencing there, is the Bradley Manning case. Bradley Manning, now known as Chelsea Manning, revealed that there was the indiscriminate slaughter of Iraqi civilians taking place in the Iraq War, and that officers knew about this but were deliberately covering it up. That is what Manning actually revealed to the public. And of course, that was revealed through Julian Assange and his WikiLeaks, and it's something that needed to be revealed. It's a disgusting thing that was taking place. People should have been charged with it. People should have been hanged for it, if I'm being perfectly honest. But it is true, the way the information was published did not take into account that there were troop locations within the information being leaked. People who had nothing to do, of course, with what was going on now had their positions and their going abouts and their to and fro's and all that on national television and in the newspaper for their enemies to just read and translate into their respective languages, right? And so that creates a complication here, right? Which is that Julian Assange absolutely is guilty of the thing that he's accused of. And essentially, the argument in his favor is that this information was, number one, some would say that it's protected by his rights as a journalist, freedom of the press, right? And number two, and this is where most people's support for Assange comes from, they would say that his deeds were honorable in the end. They may have been sloppy. They may have been done in such a way that leaves something to be desired. But they were honorable. They were righteous. They were just. And I happen to be in that number of people who, I actually was amongst those who was deeply hopeful that President Trump would pardon Julian Assange. That did not end up happening. I don't think there's much hope for President Biden actually doing so, but who knows, right? I've been wrong before, and I would certainly welcome a presidential pardon from Biden because it doesn't matter who does it. The fact is that I think Assange is a deeply honorable man who deserves to be honored for what he did, at least pardoned, but I think honored for what he did. And I think we can let the sloppiness, even though it is sloppiness that could have gotten people killed, I grant that, right? But I think we let it go in this situation. I think the gravity of the positivity that he did in revealing that information, as well as a whole bunch of other information, that was deeply relevant to corruption in the United States government, the UN, etc., right? I say that outweighs the potential bad that never did end up actually coming to fruition anyways. Thank God, by the way, because that obviously, it's not that these things are excused, right? It's that in games like this, love and war, as they say, more than the amount of things which you previously thought are fair are now fair, to abuse the quote a little bit, right? Obviously you guys let me know what you think in the comment section or the live chat, depending on where you're at right now. But regardless, that's my feelings on this. In December, the High Court, in London, overturned a lower court's ruling that he should not be extradited because his mental health problems meant he would be at risk of suicide. And of course, when you're at risk of suicide in the United States, you're also at risk of being suicided. And what is being suicided? Well, we also like to call that being Epsteined. And I think you can put the pieces together for yourself after that, can't you? Epstein didn't kill himself, by the way. Anyways, while judges refused him permission for a direct appeal to the Supreme Court on their decision, they said his case raised an issue of legal importance that he could ask the UK's top court to rule on. Quote, the respondent's application to certify a point of law is granted, the court said. The respondent's application for leave to appeal the Supreme Court is refused, end quote. This means the Supreme Court will have to decide whether or not it should hear his challenge. So it's not as big a victory, in other words, as we would like it to be. The appeal has not been defeated. Rather, this is just saying they will hear the appeal in the sense that they'll consider it. They will not. This is not saying they'll hear the appeal in the sense that they've taken the case, right? To give a comparison that Americans will be very familiar with because it's happening right now, the Texas law, the Texas abortion law, never actually went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court agreed to hear it, meaning that they agreed to decide whether or not they would legally take it, right? They decided not to take the case, and therefore it will not be going to the Supreme Court. But you see what the difference is there, right? You can agree to hear it, meaning you've agreed to have a discussion about whether or not this case should go to the Supreme Court. And then you can also say you've agreed to hear it, meaning you've agreed to now take this case to the Supreme Court, right? Hope I explained the difference articulately there. But nonetheless, that's that article there. Obviously, kind of a short one, but definitely something that I did want to talk about. There is obviously, a lot of stuff to talk about with the Assange situation. I think, to be honest with you, the accusations against Assange in regards to spying and stuff like that, I don't know that they would be, I don't know that they would actually be accepted if he had revealed other things. In other words, if the things that he revealed didn't make the United States military look bad, but maybe made Fox News look bad, or maybe made the FBI look bad, or maybe made President Trump look bad, I think that he would probably get a lot more defense from our media than he currently does. And you guys know I'm no fan of President Trump, right? And I'm no fan of Fox News. But I do think that the bias against Assange does have a lot to do with the fact that he's pissed off the powers that be, right? Hillary Clinton's a very powerful woman. The United States military is full of very powerful men. The United Nations, of course, very powerful men and women all around. That the nature of playing the hero's game is that sometimes you make people angry who have the ability to make sure that you are not heard from ever again. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they whack you, because they got plenty of ways of making sure that you're silenced without actually making sure that you're whacked. I do see, well, yeah, let's go ahead and end the show, actually. I was going to say, I see that we have a limited amount of time left. We're not quite at the hour, but I can save the other news articles for Wednesday. The other things I was going to talk about is South Carolina's recent discussion about a potential abortion law, and also ThedaCare losing a lawsuit in Wisconsin to try and keep their employees. If those two things end up being relevant enough and I don't have a whole bunch of other information to rant about, we'll talk about those on Wednesday. But if not, then, that's what happens. So for those of you who are here, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you. If you appreciated this show, please consider liking and subscribing to this channel, sharing this video to the different social media platforms which you frequent, and getting it out to your friends and family. Of course, what good is a message without an audience to hear it? Please consider hitting that bell if you're new here to get notified of every time we go live. We try to post these Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays to various degrees of success. But so far, been pretty successful this year, so thank the Lord for that. Want to remind you guys that if you like this content, you can actually help me turn this into a career, either by a one-time donation through our PayPal or to a monthly subscription of any amount you choose, anything from $1 to $100 or anything in between. You can do whatever you like. I don't set up certain classifications of there's this tier and this tier and all that kind of stuff. But my only request is that if you do give, you give with trepidation. You give not because you like me, because you think I'm a swell guy, because you'd like me to get to my hopes and dreams, stuff like that. No, I would like you to give because you see me as somebody who is actually delivering the news honestly, who's giving you a good and fresh political perspective, who is actually handling this information with the proper care and respect. And if indeed I am that person, we need more of those people. If I'm not, we definitely don't need another voice in the abundance of morons that we currently have in the world. So thank you guys for being here again. Shalom and God bless you. I just want to go ahead and remind you guys to think like a Neanderthal, because this is the Synagogue News. And to all of my fellow watchdogs, I would just like to ask you this question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?